This is the all-new way to travel. Its sadistic design has won all sadistic awards of this planet, or wherever we are. Lots of spikes, threads from a tank, and of course 2 doors, which are too small, make this an experience you will never forget. This is the Sadism Express.
Hey there, this is Mr. Icarus, and welcome to yet another edition of Doom Oh wait, no, this is Half-Life. I keep managing to screw that up. Maybe it's something about having played nothing but Doom for weeks and weeks on end. It kind of gets lodged in the brain somewhere, but yes, this is quite obviously Half-Life. And welcome to Mod Madness. This time around, we are checking out a mod by the name of HalfQuake. Now, prior to picking this up, I had never heard of this mod before. It only really came to my attention because I saw a news alert that it had been released on Steam. And I just thought, you know what, I've played a lot of Doom recently. Maybe I should switch it up. Maybe pick up a Half-Life mod. Ooh, HalfQuake. That looks interesting. Wonder what that's about. It's about pain. Largely about having it inflicted on you. In a variety of ways. It's quite possibly one of the worst decisions I've made recently. And one of the bigger factors in that is the fact that there is a lot of HalfQuake to be played through, because this is the HalfQuake Trilogy. And this stretches from its original entry, which I'm playing right now in 2001, to its most recent, which is called HalfQuake Sunrise in 2010. But anyway, I'm kind of getting ahead of myself. I should probably give you a general idea of what the setup of HalfQuake is. So you are imprisoned. You're in a cage, and you are told that you are going to be punished. For what reason? Not entirely sure. Not entirely sure. Just know that you're probably going to die a lot, and it's going to seem unfair. In fact, that's the point. A lot of the puzzles and traps and just general encounters that you'll run into during the course of HalfQuake will be the kind that you are not expected to survive first time round. It's very much the lol, you just got trolled school of design. Now, on the basis of that alone, I'm reasonably sure a fair few of you out there have already made up your minds on whether or not this is the right mod for you. And really, if you put a high value on your own time, then yeah, this is gonna waste it. This is gonna waste your time all day long, because you get a lot of these rooms that force you to backtrack, to loop around, to retry over and over and over until you eventually figure it out. For example, I thought I was able to break through this with my crowbar. Guess what? You can't. Then again, if you know what you're getting into, there is certainly a high level of amusement to be found, especially in the opening entry of HalfQuake, because just walking into one room and seeing how it's set up just starts firing off all the possibilities in your mind. You're like, well, how is this room gonna screw me over today? And it really does force you to be a heck of a lot more observant than you normally would be. If anything, it certainly showcases the creativity, and let's face it, outright sadism, of the authors behind it. Rarely will you find the solution to a room in 1 or 2 deaths, usually maybe 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th. Sometimes double figures if you're particularly clumsy that day. But really, the one thing that keeps you moving forward is the knowledge that these rooms do have solutions. The game isn't so sadistic as to put you in a situation you can't win. There are ways out, and you're always eager to discover what's next, what challenge you'll have to overcome around the corner. And that leads to some really neat little situations, such as this, which is quite possibly one of my favorite moments from HalfQuake. Completely didn't expect this. Takes you out of the first person and puts you in a kind of side-scrolling platformer situation. I was so disorientated because the controls are still WAS and D. You still have mouse control to kind of turn your character around. And having to deal with that perspective out of the blue was just, mind-melting. Another aspect of this opening entry in the trilogy that I quite enjoy, and is in fact an aspect that recurs throughout the trilogy itself, is the willingness of HalfQuake to put you back in familiar situations and then just tweak the script on you ever so slightly. I thought an escape door was going to open. I thought that first crusher was going to get right up into my face, but no, secondary crusher. Panic ensues, and as a result, I forget how to jump. Now you're probably wondering how I didn't become a gibbering pile of frustration, what with all of this constant rug pulling going on. And all I'll say to that end is you best become intimately familiar with the quick save button. I'm pretty sure I've worn my F6 key thin at this point playing HalfQuake, because if there's one thing that HalfQuake comprehensively does not give a shit about, it's about providing sensible checkpoints. It really doesn't care. In either case, it's a lesson you'll learn pretty damn quick, especially if you want to persevere for any significant length of time, because HalfQuake is a mod that doesn't just punish your innocent mistakes. It's also a mod that punishes the frustration that is potentially born of those mistakes. The urge to charge back in head first and think, you know what, I've got this. I know what the deal is. You're not getting the best of me this time, and guess what? You're dead again. So, would I say I enjoyed my time with the first entry in the HalfQuake Trilogy? Well, enjoyment in of itself is a relative term, but ultimately I was amused by the myriad ways that HalfQuake was attempting to irritate me. And it's never dull. That's definitely a mark in its favor. It's never dull. It's constantly switching itself up, constantly trying to subvert your expectations, and it didn't really take up too much of my time either, ultimately clocking in about an hour 15 minutes. As a result of this, I felt somewhat emboldened to just go nuts and dive straight into the other entry of the HalfQuake Trilogy, also known as HalfQuake Amen. I figured it was going to run about the same kind of length as this one, maybe offer a similar experience. Oh boy, was I wrong about that. So, HalfQuake Amen, or as I like to call it, HalfQuake Art School. There's certainly a very big change here when it comes to the visuals, and there's also a change when it comes to the questions that it's asking you. This is an edition of HalfQuake that gets a little philosophical on your ass. Really, at its core, it's a mod that is at odds with its own existence. It wants you to consider the point of perseverance, of putting yourself through all of its shenanigans. And really, when it comes to me, I know exactly why I'm here, because I want to see what's next. And as it turns out, there's quite a lot of next to be experienced, especially in comparison to that first entry of HalfQuake. So, whereas that one ran about an hour 15, this ran closer to 3 hours 15. Yeah, you're gonna be in this one for the long haul. As you can imagine, with such a lengthy running time, keeping up a constant rate of poking and prodding is something that isn't quite gonna work, and wisely the authors of this realized that and decided instead to break up a lot of the more frustrating sections involving tricks and traps with the occasional atmospheric interlude that asks you to explore a space and just kind of experience what's going on, enjoy the sights and the sounds. I was particularly a fan of this section here, which drops you into a hub connected to 4 rooms, and in each room there is a switch. If you flick the switch, it adds a new musical layer to the track that's currently playing, and it really does lend a nice little sense of interactivity to the world that you're making your way through. For me, it bugged me ever so slightly that the tracks weren't syncing up because of my slightly wonky button presses, but ultimately, it all comes together rather nicely. You get everything flowing, then you hit the exit button, and it combines them all into what it's supposed to sound like, and it's a wonderful little moment. And then I suddenly remembered there was an aspect of HalfQuake that I was forgetting, a very important aspect at that, the fact that I should be quick saving as often as humanly possible, because much like the initial entry, HalfQuake Amen doesn't do checkpoints all that great. So how about HalfQuake Amen's approach to tricks, traps, and puzzles? Well, if I had to use a single word to describe them, I would most assuredly describe them as whimsical. This situation here certainly fits the bill. Stuck in a gently rotating room that will kill you with fall damage lest you get out the exit, all the while accompanied by light piano music. Some situations will strike you as initially quite vague in terms of what you're actually supposed to do, until realization dawns and you suddenly discover it was the most obvious thing in the world. This one in particular caused me a great deal of embarrassment when I finally understood exactly what I was supposed to do, Rather than simply hopping from block to block like a completely oblivious git, I instead finally applied pressure to some of my brain cells and deciphered those arcane instructions that were written on the wall. As it turned out, they were quite literal. Use floor means get on the block, hit use on the floor, and use ceiling means get on the block and use the ceiling. You should have heard the slap of the hand to my forehead. It was deafening. At some point, you will acquire the Sword of Sadism, and this essentially marks the point in HalfQuake Amen where the more lofty and philosophical themes of the mod come to the forefront. It also coincidentally coincides with the biggest time sink of a section in the entire mod. You'll be doing a lot of wandering across surreal and foreign lands, and if you think that you can use the sword on your douchebag captors, well, guess what? You can, but they'll kill you anyway. If there's one thing that this section makes abundantly clear, it's that HalfQuake Amen doesn't care about your time. In fact, it is positively eager to waste it. The whole point of this particular section is it has you wandering around looking for items to solve various side quests, and they're all nonsensical. They ultimately add up to nothing, and it's all in service of eventually allowing you into a section called Patience, and believe me, we'll get to that. It's quite possibly one of the most infamous things about HalfQuake Amen. But this area serves yet another purpose, and that is to pretty much ram home the core philosophies of the author of the mod, or at least the philosophies that the author had at the time of making it. If you're looking for the Cliff Notes version, it's that life is ultimately nonsensical. And yeah, I can pretty much agree with that. Sounds about right to me, but the thing about this is it's delivered through a voice-acted diary entry, which gives it a bit more of a personal flavor. There've been other diary entries before this, but those have largely been in the form of text that simply scrolls up the screen. If I'm going to be honest, it comes off as a bit of a muddle when you try and decipher the core points that are being brought up. It seems to be a bit of a lament against society, the rules are all wrong kind of thing, and the people should be more individualistic and strive to make sense of the nonsensical, but not in the way that they want you to. Who are they? I don't know. I'm confused. It's probably worth mentioning that this same section of mod also features a part where you stack boxes while dressed as Santa Claus in an effort to get onto the roof, jump into the chimney, and then fool a Christmas tree possessed by a Christmas carol singing ghosts to exercise itself and finally shut the fuck up. Good grief, I need a drink. Welcome to Patience. This is that section of the mod I was talking about, by the way, the most infamous section of HalfQuake Amen. So infamous that the mod itself warns you about it much earlier on, flat out telling you that it's going to be a complete waste of time and you should probably walk away, make a cup of tea, read a book, or in my case, just drink several cans of alcohol. It goes on for a good 15 minutes or so, I think. Something like that. But in all honesty, this is, in my opinion, the most devious section of HalfQuake Amen, because it honestly fools you into thinking there might be something worthwhile to stick around for, but there isn't. It's completely pointless. It's ultimately nonsensical. See? There you go. There's the theme. There's the theme. Deep. Deep. But yeah, it got me. It got me with the lure of interactivity. There's a phone you can answer every now and again when it rings. There's a poster on the wall that you can use and grants you the ability to lower the gravity and jump through the hole onto the other platform, which you think might be a good idea, just in case this section is going to be devious and screw you over and have the train arrive on the other side and then disappear before you can get on it. It plays on all of those fears and worries, and it's just here to waste your time. Just like I'm doing right now. You're welcome. After it's gotten that out of its system, HalfQuake Amen finally launches into its closing section, giving you more of those tricks, traps, and puzzles that you've probably been craving ever since you picked up the Sword of Sadism. It's a welcome return, even if it does mean a spike in the death count compared to the relatively languid last few sections, and it even manages to work in a few neat little callbacks to the original HalfQuake entry. If anything, it's moments like these where HalfQuake is at its strongest, finding amusing and interesting ways to just annoy me and make me think a little harder about what I'm trying to get through. For example, one of my absolute favorites from HalfQuake Amen has to be a puzzle that had me exit the game and go looking through the files to find a very specific text file that contained the solution. That kind of stuff, those kind of shenanigans that HalfQuake occasionally pulls, are the things that truly impress me. Less so the pretense to deeper philosophies and meanings, and more when it gets down to brass tacks and just wants to push my buttons. So, how does it all end in HalfQuake Amen? Well, by doing the exact same thing it's been doing all along, relentlessly trying to piss you off. And it does so by reuniting you with the final enemy of the first HalfQuake, which is called Somos, and giving you a fair few more buttons to push in the process of killing it. And trust me, this is one of the most tedious sections you will endure in HalfQuake Amen. Probably up there with the train station. It's just Switch Flip City. You have to flip so many of them in the process of blowing this thing up, and every step of the way you're running into things that will just insta-kill you. You'll get there eventually though, through sheer force of will or otherwise, you'll get there. It's doable. That's all you need to keep in mind, that ultimately getting through HalfQuake Amen is doable. You can take all of the wacky crap it throws your way, just revel in the knowledge that afterwards you can sit down, take a load off, have a nice drink, and then maybe think about all the things you have left to accomplish. Oh god! I just remembered it's a trilogy! Speaking personally, I regard HalfQuake Sunrise as my least favorite entry in the HalfQuake Trilogy. Paradoxically, however, I also regard this as the best made entry in the HalfQuake Trilogy. It's a tricky one. It's a tricky one for me to explain. And I think part of it comes down to the fact that in my quest to cover these, I essentially marathoned them, one after the other. You shouldn't do that, by the way. I heavily recommend against it, because by the time you reach this entry, you will be exhausted. You will be comprehensively sick of HalfQuake's shit. I just want you to bear all that in mind, because as a result, I'm going to have a bit of a skewed opinion on this final section here. But that doesn't detract from the fact that HalfQuake Sunrise is a really intriguing entry in the HalfQuake Trilogy. It comes 8 years after HalfQuake Amen. It felt like it went through its own little kind of development hell, and the product is very different from the tone of what came before. It's something that you can certainly feel right from the get-go, and I feel that's down to a much more effective use of monochromatic color palettes. The gray that permeates the stone here makes it feel very cold and ominous, and it certainly makes other more stylistic elements like the black and white cubes here pop all the more effectively. Beneath all of that, however, you've also got this ambient noise droning away in the background that you might not notice at first, but it slowly starts seeping in and you notice it's there. And you get the sense that very, very bad things are going to happen to you here. The thing about HalfQuake Sunrise is it is all business, whereas the other HalfQuake entries had this veneer of playfulness to them. This one just wants to hurt you right off the bat. You'll be skewered, squashed, dropped from a great height. I mean, don't even get me started on how many times this just pulls the rug from right beneath your feet. It is ruthless. One of the more impressive things to witness as you make your way through the HalfQuake Trilogy is seeing the evolution of the puzzles, just the change of the construction and complexity as you go from one entry to the next. And HalfQuake Sunrise really does feel like a culmination of many years of learning the ropes and figuring out what works best, and just how to craft a truly interesting and occasionally devious puzzle. One of my favorites was certainly this one here. A musical puzzle that has you rearranging stones on the wall in order to play the correct tune. When you do, the path opens up, but that isn't the end of it. You then have to cross over, use the stones as steps upwards, while avoiding the actual music player itself, because believe it or not, that thing'll kill you. In fact, I'm not entirely sure I actually completed this by avoiding the music player. The way I actually ended up doing it was dying so many times that it glitched and the music player just clipped through the wall, leaving me free and easy to make my way upwards. So, yay for breaking things, I guess?
Hey, victim. I just wanted to let you know, you suck. Cheers.
So yeah, keeping the experience from getting a little too lonely and alienating, you do have access to these message boxes during the course of your HalfQuake Sunrise playthrough. I wouldn't really recommend it unless you want to be insulted or told stories about missing cogwheels by insane people, but it at least provides you with some semblance of human interaction. It really is one of the things that help break up a lot of the brutal puzzles that you'll be running into during the course of this, because the flow between them is really slick. Going from one room to the next is pretty effortless here in terms of level design, and you don't really feel like you get a lot of opportunities to just stop, take it easy, and not have to think about getting your head caved in by a spike. If anything, I feel like HalfQuake Sunrise could benefit from more of this kind of stuff to interact with, just to break up the monotony of getting your shit constantly kicked in by all of these immaculately designed death traps. But just so you've got a bit of an idea for how long you can expect to spend during this particular entry in terms of hours of your life, I think I clocked up about 5 hours. Yeah. And I cheated. If I had to pinpoint the moment where the cracks in my resolve blossomed into a full-on fracture, I'd say it was during this. And by all accounts, it's a thuddingly simple thing to understand. On every count of 4, you gotta make sure you avoid the crusher. And then at a certain point, it'll add another phase, and you gotta duck, and then jump. But the real kicker is where it introduces one final fuck you in the rhythm right at the end and kills you. Now at first I thought that was a bug, because it happens too quick for you to tell what's happening. You can't actually see where the crusher is coming from, you've just got to assume that you know what the rhythm is and you've got it on lock. And I was possessed with the idea that this game was just fucking broke. I ranted, I raged, I threw friggin' plastic bottles across the room because I don't want to smash any of my precious teacups. And it's just a textbook example of how good this is at pushing your buttons, at drawing you in by giving you just enough time to get accustomed to something, and then pulling that rug out from beneath your feet. I got there eventually. I figured it out. It took a lot of deaths. And this is edited for time, in case you were wondering, but I finally made the decision to stay on the ground instead of jumping, and what do you know? That was the solution. But like I said earlier, the downtime between new situations is absolutely minimal. You don't get a lot of time to recover before having to readjust your mind to deal with a new puzzle or trap. And unfortunately, yours truly didn't have the luxury of saving the game, walking away from the computer and staring out at the sea. That just wasn't a possibility. So my mindset at this point in time was very much, fuck this shit. So yeah, I clipped through the wall because I hate puzzles like that. I can't friggin' stand them. I just didn't want to waste my life doing that. when I could be moving on and seeing what interesting stuff this has to offer. And oh my god, the next one was even worse. This swinging arm crane puzzle is fucking Satan incarnate. This thing will drive you mad. You've got 4 arms on this crane. Each button moves one of them. It'll either point front to back or side to side. And the whole conceit is you've got to guide it past all of these obstacles lining the walls. The second one of those arms touches one of those obstacles, you go boom, and your sanity goes bye-bye. It is a mindfuck. It really is. Now, it might look like I'm actually doing fairly well at this point, but that's before I realized just how long I would need to keep this up for. You get round about 2 of these corners, and then before you know it, you are staring down an absolute gauntlet of bullshit, and your brain just can't comprehend it. And inevitably, sooner or later, you're gonna hit the wrong friggin' button. Now, if you think that doesn't sound so bad, that you could probably deal with that yourself, throw in a little bit of spice. Throw in the fact that these arms will move themselves at various points during this journey into different positions, thereby fucking you over and occasionally wanting to make you gouge your own eyes out. It really is a nerve shredder. I don't think I can emphasize that enough. If there's one thing I regret not being able to do when capturing the footage for this section of the mod, I really regret not being able to capture my live audio at the time. You would have heard noises like you wouldn't believe. I didn't think I was capable of those sounds, but this brought them out of me. If I'm gonna be honest, after that everything else felt like a cakewalk. It didn't matter if they killed me over and over and over like the chessboard here, but I was actually having fun with this because it was an ingenious puzzle. This one makes you move like a chess piece. It took me a while to get to grips with that fact, as you can tell, but the picture on the wall says bishop, which can move diagonally, and you're supposed to go from that starting point to the next one and hit the right button, which I failed to do. Another favorite was the 2D but not 2D platforming section, which requires you to pay attention to the shapes on the wall in order to actually get down the corridor. It's yet another really cool implementation of just strange mechanics that honestly cooked my noodle for a few moments until my brain acclimatized to what I was supposed to be paying attention to and actually doing. Yeah, that's an interactive text adventure built into this mod. Ain't that the neatest shit? Ain't that friggin' fantastic? I mean, in the middle of all the pain and the suffering that this entry inflicts on you, you can't help but just stop for a moment sometimes and just drink in the sheer magnitude of what you're looking at. The effort and dedication in the construction of these immaculate death traps. You know what? I'm even entertaining the thought of some point coming back to this, after I've had enough time to cool down, after the memories of the trauma have faded away. I might just come back to this, fresh, not have to endure the previous 2 entries in order to get to this, and maybe, just maybe, I'll have a much better time with it as a result. But if there's one thing I can still be sure of, it's fuck that crane puzzle, fuck the jumping and squatting puzzle, and comprehensively fuck the final boss. You know, I get what they're going for. I really do, but in my opinion, the encounters with Somos at the end of each entry in HalfQuake constitute some of the weakest stuff in the trilogy. I honestly think you could get rid of this shit completely and not have any entry suffer as a result. I'm not gonna get into spoilers, by the way, but you could take the ending of each HalfQuake entry and just have it happen to you unceremoniously at the end of a room. And it would still fit the theme. It really would. Instead, we get crap like this, and the reason why I really dislike this particular incarnation of Somos is because it takes an admittedly cool idea and stretches it out way too thin. So the idea is Somos will blow holes in the walls and you can escape through them, only they'll lead you to older rooms that you may recognize from earlier entries of HalfQuake. It's a really neat way to acknowledge the earlier entries in the series and bring it all together as a whole. It's not something that comes out of the blue either. In fact, it's hinted at quite strongly during the course of HalfQuake Sunrise. The trouble with it is that it's janky as all hell. Firstly, Somos can one-shot you with his lightning. That I can understand. What I don't understand is that jumping through to another room can occasionally kill you with the fall damage. Also, if you're really unfortunate with your saves, this will keep happening to you. Over and over and over. And if you've had to endure several hours of relentless shit-kicking bullshit, you're gonna break and say, fuck this, where's the God mode? It's like having a really tasty-looking dish put in front of you, and then out of the blue, from somewhere in the ceiling, a giant stinking turd just lands smack dab in the middle of the plate. That's what this section is to me. I just don't think I can overstate how disappointing this section is in comparison to everything else in HalfQuake Sunrise. It's just so sloppy, and I get part of that is by design, but what I can't abide by are the random bursts of static while you're jumping between these sections, because it's not just a distraction tactic. Oh no, the static actually robs you of momentum. For example, if you're jumping from one platform to another and you're hit by a burst of static mid-air, you don't continue through that. You stop, and then you drop like a sack of crap directly onto the kill floor. To me, that doesn't feel like interesting design. That doesn't feel like a devious mechanic. That just feels like running out of ideas. So, how best to sum up my time spent with the HalfQuake Trilogy? I mean, what I really want to do is let out a primal scream, the likes of which no one has ever heard before, to such a degree that the police will probably be summoned to my place of residence for fear of some horrific murder in progress. But instead, I will simply say, thank God that's done with. I don't know if there's any more that even needs to be said, if I'm going to be honest. It was an ordeal. It was an ordeal, one that I don't think I'm really going to repeat anytime soon. I won't deny that it was an interesting experience. It was fascinating seeing the evolution of design between each entry, and I was genuinely intrigued to see what each one of them had up their sleeve with regards to tricks and traps and puzzles. It honestly kept me invested, and that is praise enough, I think, when it comes to this style of game. When it comes to a game that is intent on pissing you off as many ways as possible, one that does that and still keeps you playing is an impressive thing. An impressive thing indeed. So yeah, if you're a fan of that style of game, if you get a kick out of testing yourself against borderline unfair scenarios, your I wanna be the guys, your getting over it's with Bennett Foddy, those style of games, then I think there might be a place in your schedule for HalfQuake. Just, pace yourself. For everyone else, you have better things to do with your life. This is not for you. At least you could experience it vicariously through this ridiculously long video. In either case, if you find yourself inexorably drawn to the delights of HalfQuake, you'll find the link, as usual, in the description below. While I'm at it, I'd like to give a great big thank you to my wonderful patrons over on Patreon. Thank you so very much for supporting the channel and for helping to make content like this possible. If you're interested in lending a hand yourself, maybe you'd like to see your name scrolling up the screen in the credits there, or maybe you'd like to gain access to early editions of my videos before anyone else, in which case you'll find the link to my Patreon page also in the description below. Hopefully you've enjoyed this video. Feel free to let me know what you thought in the comments, and feel free to suggest any mods you'd like to see me cover in future editions of Mod Madness. This has been Mr. Icarus. Thank you very much for watching. Icarus out.